we're going to go in a completely different direction, but actually not that different. And we're going to talk about space for a little bit. But I'm really excited to introduce General John W. J. Raymond. General Raymond was the first Chief of Space Operations, U.S. Space Force, and has had just a storied career that has culminated in what is now the newest branch of the military. So, General, if you would like to join me on stage, we look forward to hearing from you.
I realize that a lot of times when I get introduced as the first CSO that you're expecting somebody else. So if I can get you to roll the first clip, please.
Mark Naird, formerly number 2 at the Air Force.
Thank you. It has always been my dream to command a service branch.
Our nation's internet runs through our vulnerable space satellites. POTUS wants complete space dominance. To that end, the president is creating a new branch, Space Force, which Mark will run.
What? So, there's a lot of truth to that clip, but, so Netflix did a show on us. Steve Carell played me in that show. How many people here know that the United States has something called a Space Force that's real other than Netflix? How many people didn't know that? Don't be bashful. We really do have one. Steve Carell was the fake, and so I've got another clip that I'm going to play that'll tell you how this event went down in real life, and then as an added bonus, I have a little clip that Steve Carell sent to me at my retirement ceremony that's built into it. So if you'll play the second clip, please.
For the first time since President Harry Truman created the Air Force over 70 years ago, think of that, we will create a brand new American military service. With today's signing, I will proudly appoint General J. Raymond, the first Chief of Space Operations, and he will become the very first member of the Space Force, and he will be on the Joint Chiefs. So, General Raymond, congratulations, and thank you for everything you've done.
Hello, General Raymond. This is Steve Carell, sending you my best wishes and congratulations on a long and illustrious career. I don't know if you're aware or not, but the fictional Space Force that I've been involved with was not renewed by Netflix. So I have some time on my hands too. And if you would like to give me a call, perhaps we could take a pottery class together, maybe a little hot yoga. Your call, whatever you like. I am wide open. Congratulations.
He's a great guy. I had an opportunity right when we started, which is right when they started, to do a Zoom call with them. It was right during COVID. And I used to get interviewed a lot, and people would ask me, what do you think about the Netflix show? And I'd always just say, oh, they picked the wrong actor. They should have picked Bruce Willis, obviously because of my haircut. So he wanted to talk to me. He heard about this. He wanted to talk to me. And I'm like, what am I going to say? And comes up on the screen, and he starts off by saying, so I hear you wanted Bruce Willis. I said, yep. And from there, I had a great conversation. But let me get into my talk. And you might be wondering, you saw me in my uniform there on stage at the night the National Defense Authorization Act was signed, which was our birth certificate. I was in an Air Force uniform. I served in the Air Force for 35 and a half years. I was in space my entire time throughout my career. And many are wondering, well, why do we need a Space Force? The Air Force was doing this for, since the beginning, since the nation got into space in the 50s. And I think there's a bunch of reasons why we did. And I'd like to go just kind of highlight a few of them. First of all, the importance of space to our military and the importance of space to every single one of you in this room. As I said, the Air Force was involved in space in the 50s, but in the 1990s, there was a war called Desert Storm when the U.S. went in to kick Iraq out of Kuwait. That, by some, has been referred to as the first space war. It's the first war where we took strategic space capabilities and integrated them into theater operations. So for those that might recall that war, the U.S. and the coalition forces did a left hook in the desert to surround the Iraqi forces. Well, how do you do that at night in a featureless terrain without stop signs or street signs telling you where to go? You used a very fledgling at the time GPS system to be able to navigate. If you were to remember, General Schwarzkopf would get on television and talk about very precise strikes. Well, how do you do that? Back then, it wasn't even GPS because the Constellation wasn't fully up and running, but it was more laser guided. But today, pretty much every weapon that we drop is a GPS guided, very precise weapon. If you recall in that war, there were Iraq was launching Scud missiles into other parts of the Middle East to try to expand the war. And we were able to use strategic missile warning systems that were designed to detect big, large intercontinental ballistic missiles, to detect little, small missiles, and to be able to give some rudimentary warning to protect our forces and protect our allies, and to keep the war from escalating. Since then, my whole career has been spent integrating space into pretty much everything we do as a joint force, since the very early 90s. And there's nothing that we do today as a joint force that isn't enabled by space. It's a huge force multiplier. It allows us to have a much smaller Air Force, a much smaller Army, a much smaller Navy, and a much smaller Marine Corps than you'd need to have if you didn't have space, because of that force multiplier capability. In addition, space fuels our American way of life. And so every one of you, whether you know it or not, has used space. And I know there's a lot of technology people in this room, so you probably know this, but a lot of times when I talk, people don't know it. You probably use space more times before you had your first cup of coffee than you would realize. If you're on your smartphone, you're using space. Without it, it's a pretty stupid phone. It doesn't connect. If you're doing internet banking, you're using space because you're using the GPS timing signal that synchronizes all of the internet banking capability in the country. If you went to the gas station and paid at the gas pump rather than going in, you've used space. That same signal connects this information age that we're in today. And so that's one of the reasons we realize the growing importance of space to our military and to our everyday way of life. The domain has changed significantly, though. Back in the 50s, it started out as great power competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. Today, I went to high school in Northern Virginia at a school called Thomas Jefferson High School. It's a science and technology school. It wasn't that when I was growing up, or I would not have gone to that school. It's probably one of the best high schools, if not the best high school in the country, but they're launching satellites. Building and launching satellites. So if you think about it, it went from great power competition to now high school students launching. Because of that, and largely because the cost of launch has gone down, largely driven by commercial space, think SpaceX and Elon Musk, the number of objects that are in space have just gone through the roof. And so if I were here a couple years ago talking to you, I would have told you we were tracking about 25,000 objects in space. We act as the space traffic control for the world. We track everything in space, and we warn against potential collisions or conjunctions. Today, just 3 years later, that number is close to 50,000, so almost doubled. If I were back here 3 years ago and I would have told you of that 25,000-ish satellites or pieces of or objects that we're tracking, only about 1,500 were satellites. Everything else is debris. Today, that number is probably, don't quote me on it, I'm retired and I'm not up to the latest minute of tracking everything in space, but I imagine the number is over 9,000. And so the trends on numbers of objects and numbers of satellites are trending significantly higher. So the domain is much more congested. The domain is much more competitive as well, and the competition among states, competition obviously in national security, competition in civil space with a race back to the moon with international space stations between us and largely China, but other countries as well, and a race in commercial space. It's a really bad word to use in the commercial business, in the space business, but there's an explosion of commercial space activities that are underway, and our goal is to try to capitalize on that. I think that's a huge strength for the United States and something that we need to use for our advantage. The other thing that, to go along with congested, competitive, there's another C that we're focused on, and that is contested. And so after the end of the Cold War, the threat to space went away, and largely the space domain was a peaceful, benign domain used for science and exploration and peaceful utilities for all of us to be able to use. our competitors, largely China and Russia, but others, have seen the advantages that we get by integrating space into everything that we do as a joint force. And they don't like what they see. They see that advantage and they don't like that. So they're doing a couple things. First of all, specifically China is building a robust suite of space capabilities for their own use. And so we have largely had a monopoly on that space integration and that advantage for many, many years. That's not the case today. China has built a very robust space program. They're integrating space into their military. And so, God forbid, if deterrence were to fail, which we don't want it to do, we would be up against a military that would have that same advantage that we have today. The other thing that they're doing is they're developing capabilities to deny us our access to space. So you can think about reversible jamming of GPS or communication satellites. You can think about lasers that can blind or dazzle satellites. You can think about satellites that are on orbit that have a dual-use purpose that can be used to degrade or disrupt or destroy U.S. satellites. China has a satellite that has a robotic arm that can reach out and grab another satellite. My satellite engineers tell me that satellites don't like to be grabbed, so that's a bad day for a satellite. Russia has a satellite that I've coined, I call it the nesting doll satellite. Have you all seen the Russian doll inside of a doll inside of a doll? Well, they have a satellite that launches and it opens up and another satellite comes out and it opens up and then a projectile comes out designed to destroy a U.S. satellite. So those are a couple examples of on-orbit capabilities that are concerning. There's also missiles that can launch from the ground and blow up satellites. China demonstrated that in 2007. Russia demonstrated that here relatively recently. The U.S. did that decades ago as a test, and we have said we will no longer do that because we do not want to create debris that would be hazardous for space operations in the future. So it's more congested, more competitive, more contested. And the character of war, the final reason I would say is the character of war have changed. Because of space and because of cyber and because of that integration of all that, those capabilities into the joint force, warfare in the future is going to be much faster. It's going to be at much greater distances. It's going to be more transparent because of all the capabilities that are up in space for everybody to understand where everything is on the globe and what everything is doing. It's going to be more autonomous. It's going to be more data-driven. It's going to have more AI integrated into it. And as you can see that character of war changing, space is at the heart of all of that. And that's really, as I was sitting in the back listening to the previous couple speakers, I think there's some synergies there with what you're talking about in this conference as well. Let me reiterate something right up front. We are the best in the world at space, us and our partners together. We've got the strongest partnerships. We've got the best people. We've got the best commercial industry. But our superiority margin was diminishing. And that's the reason why we set up a Space Force, to stay ahead in this competition and to be able to deter conflict from a position of strength. I want to repeat, we do not want to get into a conflict that begins or extends into space. Our goal is that space offers a unique opportunity to develop global partnerships and to be able to add to that deterrence calculus. And if we can deter conflict from beginning or extending into space, then we have a chance of deterring conflict that would spill over into other domains. So today, just as we have an Army that's focused on the ground domain and Air Force focused on the air domain, that video on 20 December 2019 at a hangar at Andrews Air Force Base, the former president signed the National Defense Authorization Act and also signed a document that kicked me out of the Air Force. And he, as he said, I became the first member of the Space Force. What he didn't say is I was the only member of the Space Force. So if you all remember the old commercials years ago, an army of one, well, I kind of brought that to life. I used to joke around with my buddies in the other services. All the services track metrics like, have we had any DUIs? Have we had any Article 15s? Have anybody gotten in trouble? Anybody gotten sick other than a cold? We were all really healthy, and everybody in our service had good metrics. Thank you very much. And I was the only one in the service until April, about 4 months later, when we started bringing in other folks. Today, that service grew from 1 to now about 16,000. Space will never be a manpower-intensive business. It's a technology-intensive business. So you're never going to see the Space Force grow up to be the size of the Army or the size of the Navy or the size of the Air Force. It'll always be the smallest. Build a service, custom built for the space domain, custom built for the 21st century. Make it a digital service. In the military, we're much more hardware-centric than software-centric. We wanted to make this a digital service. Do so without any new resources. So anything that we built, we had to take from internal to the Department of Defense, which made me very popular with my friends, because everything I got came from them. We had to do everything from uniforms, ID cards, flags, seals, core values, to doctrine, warfighting, budget, people, and everything in between. Let me tell you a couple funny stories. So the law was signed on 20 December. I went home to Colorado Springs for the holidays, and I go TDY, temporary duty, back to the Pentagon, and that's where I was going to move, because I was a member of the Joint Chiefs. I had to live at the Pentagon or work at the Pentagon. So I come back very early in January, and I show up, and I'm wearing an Air Force uniform, which I had worn for 35 and a half years. I said, I need a new uniform. I'm not in the Air Force anymore. So what we wear day to day is a digital camouflage we call OCPs. And in the Air Force, my name, Raymond, would have been in brown thread. If I was in the Army wears the same uniform. It was in black thread. And I thought, I'll just change the color thread. And so I came up with blue and silver. And I went to the Oval Office, and no kidding, I'm sitting at the front of the president in the desk, and I had in my coat and tie uniform, and I had on a hanger my shirt, my OCP shirt, and I had Raymond in 4 different colors. I said, sir, in the Air Force, I wear brown. If I was in the Army, I'd wear black. I think I need a new color, and I had blue and silver. And the president said, I think I like blue. And I said, I like blue too. It's good not to disagree with the commander-in-chief. So blue it was. And so I went home, and that night my aides had 2 shirts already, one in blue and one in silver, depending on which way the decision went. So the next morning I get up. I was living on the 11th floor of a hotel, got on the elevator, and I was on the 11th floor. We went down to the 9th floor, and a lady walked in. And we're going down the lobby, and she's looking at me like I have, something's wrong with me. And we get all the way down the lobby, and the lady says, sir, can I ask you a question? She says, I don't think I've ever met anybody in the Space Force before, and I don't think I've ever seen, and I know I haven't seen a Space Force uniform. I said, well, ma'am, I'm the only person in the Space Force, and today is the first day that I wore the uniform, so you're not dreaming. Let me give you another funny story, and this deals with what this conference deals with. I had to have an ID card. My ID card said I was in the Air Force. So I tell my exec, who's a colonel, I said, hey, I need a new ID card, and it needs to say Space Force. He said, no problem. He walks down the hall to the ID card shop, said, hey, General Raymond needs a new ID card. He's not in the Air Force anymore, he's in the Space Force. And he comes back and he says, sir, I got some bad news. He said, that's not going to happen. I said, what do you mean it's not going to happen? He said, well, it's going to take millions and millions and millions of dollars, and it's going to take 3 years for you to get an ID card. I said, not good enough, try again. So he walks down the hall, and a couple weeks later, I come into the office after a meeting. He said, sir, I got great news. I got your ID card, and it's on your desk. I said, great. So I go in, and in the military, your ID card also unlocks your computer. So I take the ID card, put it in my computer, put in my code, didn't work. Try again, didn't work. So I call him and say, hey, Colonel Hutt, it's not working. He said, oh, no, sir, it doesn't work. It's a fake. It just looks like an ID card. He said, it won't get you onto base. It won't get you into your computer. It won't get you into the medical clinic. This little, barcode on the back has like 6 or 7 different systems that feed data into that, and all of those have to be changed, and it's going to take millions and millions of dollars, and it's going to take 3 years. And no kidding, almost 3 years to the date, I got an ID card that worked. And so when you talk about building a digital service, that's not, the Department of Defense is good in a lot of things, but we are not a digital leader. And it's something that we've got to get better at, and it's something that you all do. I mean, you come in here and you have a robot that gives you your little badge. I mean, it's pretty incredible. Let me give you a couple minutes on some of what I think are our biggest successes, and then what I'd like to do is open it up for any kind of questions that you all might have. But I think the biggest advantage that we've had since establishing the Space Force is the quality of people that we're attracting. So you may have heard that the Department of Defense is having a recruiting problem. We are not. Now, we recruit a lot smaller numbers than the other services have, but we have more people knocking on our door wanting to come in than we can take. It's a great problem to have. And not only do we have the greatest numbers that we've ever had, but the quality of those folks are going through the roof. Rhodes Scholars, NCAA track champions. It's across the board. The talent level that we're attracting is just remarkably better. Not that we were bad in the past, but we're the most selective service there is today. And again, the talent level that we're attracting is really, really quite incredible. Our budget, in the first 3 years since establishing the Space Force, our budget doubled. We went from about $16 billion to just over $30 billion per year to provide the space capabilities that I talked about up front, fuel our way of life and fuel our way of war. That still only represents about 2.5% of the entire DoD budget. So in the big scheme of things, it's not hugely expensive, but $30 billion is a lot of money. The biggest thing that money is going to is something called force design. And I know in looking at some of the posters out front and hearing some of the conversations that you also are talking about design. What we have today is a force structure in space, our satellite constellations, that were really built for a peaceful, benign domain. They are built for a domain that didn't have a threat. And so what you'll see are very small in numbers of very large, very exquisite, the world's best satellites, but they're kind of like the big kids in gym class that can't run very fast. They're hard to protect, and they're hard to defend. And so we needed to shift that architecture. And what we're shifting that architecture to is a more proliferated architecture. So rather than having handfuls of satellites, we'll have hundreds of satellites in multiple orbits, which will allow us to accomplish the mission better, but will also allow us to complicate the targeting of any competitor or adversary that may want to do us harm. And we're really modeling that after what's going on in commercial industry. The other area that I would say we've had a great advantage on is that partnership with commercial industry. I'm going to tell you another story. Right after we stood up the Space Force, again in January, just a couple of weeks after we stood up, I flew out to Washington State and met up with Elon Musk at his Starlink factory. Have you all heard of the Starlink constellation, which is global internet from space? This was January of 2020, so a little over 4.5 years or so ago. I go into his factory, and he said, General Raymond, he said, and the factory was a large room, much larger than this, but it was empty. And he said, sir, I've got 2 satellites on orbit that I don't like as prototypes. I've got to redesign those satellites. And then I'm going to build this factory. And satellite parts are going to come in over here, and they're going to go down this way, and they're going to get processed, and they're going to go over here and do some more of the processing. And then they'll get over there, and there'll be a satellite. And then I'm going to launch those satellites on the SpaceX rocket. In April, so less than 4 months later, he launched 60 satellites. Think about that. He redesigned them, he built the factory, he built 60 satellites, he integrated them on a launch vehicle, and he launched them. I'm just, let's say, ma'am, you're a GPS satellite, and you're orbiting at 11,000 nautical miles high in medium Earth orbit, providing precision navigation and timing for the world, and I want to buy a clone just like you, exactly like you. No new arm, no new ear, nothing, just exactly like you. How long does that take me to do in the government? Anybody hazard a guess? 5 years. For one satellite, one clone. It takes me 2 years to get dollars from Congress. Then I had to buy long lead parts. Then I have to build the satellite. And if it's going to be that expensive and take that long, we can't make a mistake, because if you launch it and it doesn't work, you don't get a do-over. And so we put all this mission assurance on it, and we make sure it's perfect. And then we launch it. It's a great business model for a domain that doesn't have a threat. It's not a great business model for the domain that we see today. And so by changing the business model and being able to have more of an assembly line approach, you can change the risk calculus, and you can do things faster. And that's the goal that we're trying to do. And as you'll watch here in the years ahead, as the Space Force looks to re-architect, you're going to see a shift from large, exquisite, small in numbers to large numbers of less exquisite satellites. The other thing that we did, we flattened the organizational structure. And so in the Air Force, there's 5 layers of command. There's a 4-star, what we call major command commander. There's a 3-star numbered Air Force commander. There's a colonel that's a wing commander. There's a colonel that's a group commander. And there's a lieutenant colonel that's a squadron commander. 5 layers of command. We wanted to flatten that. We wanted to push authorities down at the lowest level. We wanted to be able to move at speed. Operations in space happen at 17,500 miles an hour just to stay in space. And we didn't want to have that kind of bureaucratic chain to get the experts doing the mission to a decision maker that could make a decision. And so we cut out 2 layers. That was very beneficial. But one of the things that we learned was, in doing that, we also had to change our developmental programs, because squadron commanders now that were at the lowest levels of command were having to do things that they didn't have to do before, because they had other layers of command that were doing it. And so we had to completely revamp how we develop our folks. The other big advantage that we have seen is partnerships with our allies and partners. In the national security business, we did not have strong international partnerships as it related in space. That was largely a NASA thing done in the civil space business. So we worked really hard to develop those. And today we've got strong partnerships with what we call our Five Eyes partners: UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the United States, obviously. We've added France, Germany, Japan, Italy, Norway to that mix. We share data with hundreds of organizations and companies, but we have really matured those partnerships. Let me give you a couple examples. In a few weeks, I'm going to go to Japan and be at a ribbon cutting for a satellite that we took a U.S. payload and put it on a Japanese satellite. And it'll allow us to have space situational awareness. It will allow us to do it more cheaply, and it'll allow us to do it here quicker than if we had to build our own satellite, because they were already building a satellite. Same thing in Norway. We had a requirement to put 2 communication satellites that would cover the northern part of the globe. Norway was already building 2 satellites. So we went to them and said, hey, do you have any room on your satellites? Could we put our payload on your satellite? Saved us $1 billion and will get us onto orbit 3 years faster than we would have if we had to build those satellites by ourselves. So those partnerships are really, really, really critical. Let me wrap up with a couple of lessons that I have learned, that maybe there's a nugget or 2 in there that might apply to you and your businesses. First of all, core value and culture matter. In one of the briefings I listened to, the gentleman talked about kind of knowing where you're going and getting lost in Italy. I think as a culture, you need to understand what do you want your culture to be, and rather than just let it kind of evolve and meander to get there, I think you need to take steps to engineer that culture to get to where you need to go and do so in a short amount of time. I cannot overstate the importance of culture to an organization. The other thing that I learned is integrating your core values with what you hold dear with that culture is really important. We had core values in the Air Force: integrity, service, and excellence, and we shifted and we came up with new core values. And we were debating, should we stick with the Air Force or should we not? When we looked at what we wanted to build as a culture, we knew that the Air Force core values wasn't going to get us there. And so we came up with character, connection, commitment, and courage. And I will tell you that those core values have really united the force and been hugely, hugely valuable. If you're going to lead change, I would tell you to think big. In the case of standing up a new service, we hadn't done this since 1947 when the Air Force separated from the Army. And we knew this wasn't going to happen again in our lifetime. And so we wanted to go bold, and we wanted to go big and be bold, not just kind of walk the dog down the street and do a little bit of iteration. I thought we had two big risks. One, that we wouldn't think bold enough. And two, if we did think bold, the bureaucracy would squash us, because that's not how we've always done business. Both of those things happened, and we had to fight both of those things. But I will tell you, it paid off in the end, because we have made some really meaningful change, not only for the Space Force, but there's also been a little bit of a disruptive innovator role for the department, and other services now have adopted some of the things that we've implemented. I told our team that at the end of this, if all the other services weren't saying, boy, I'm jealous, I wish I had what they had, then we did this wrong, because we're custom building this for today rather than taking something that was 100 years old and evolving it. I think you have to build allies and partners. Especially in a global business, those are global allies and partners, but you also have to build allies and partners internal to your business, internal with your suppliers. Those partnerships are really critical, especially when you're trying to change, and getting people to jump on the bandwagon with you and try to affect change, I found was extremely, extremely important. And if you can develop some early wins and show the path of goodness, it helps generate excitement, it helps generate momentum. And if those wins are not just for you, but if you can generate wins for others, that helps you attract more partners. And so it was a huge honor to be able to establish this service. It was a huge honor to lead the 16,000 active duty and civilian guardians. I will tell you that without a doubt, we are way better postured today for the strategic environment that we face than we were just 5 years ago. This December will be the 5th birthday of the Space Force. I'm proud of that force. They're delivering great advantage for you, for the military, and our allies and partners around the globe. Thanks very much for allowing me to be here.